Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Abby, for that introduction. We can move to the next slide. Next, yes, that one. Thank you. I like to look at the ocean space in terms of its occupants. And today we've heard a great deal about occupants at different levels. We've heard about the hotels, we've heard about shipping sectors, we've heard about fisheries and different occupants that have used this space since time immemorial for different things. So this picture just illustrates some of the occupants that we may not see. We have had a dialogue the last few sessions touching on aquaculture, and we have seaweed going on very strong in some of our ocean spaces. When we come to the beaches, we have a lot of beach traders that are dependent on tourism, both international, local, and also occupy a space on the beaches. We have fishers, we have ships that come and go, and fishers especially that craft a livelihood from the ocean space. And I'd also like to highlight silent space users. Often sometimes we do not see them, sometimes we see the ones that are more visible. And I consider these, I think, the voiceless occupants of this ocean space. We have the starfish that are visible, turtles, fish that we see very visibly. But also the water column hosts a great deal of organisms that can only be seen under the microscope, but are still occupants of this space. So I like to use this slide to just illustrate that our MSP process has to take care of both those who have a voice and those who are visible, and then also provide for those that are voiceless in that space. We can go to the next slide. I had, Abby, the next slide. Yes, I had the privilege of hosting 2 days of a session over 2 days that looked at environmental pressures that we should consider, as well as decision support tools that we should consider in our MSP process. And I'll just take a few minutes to recap on what we came up in terms of recommendations from that work. And I believe it echoes and resonates very well with what has come out of this last 2 days of discussions and expert input. And in short, habitat connectivity was considered very important, and we've talked about that now. Biodiversity, even more important. And I think what came out when we looked at biodiversity, as Judith highlighted in her excellent talk, is that it's not enough to look at habitats in a whole, but also individual species, because different species have different responses to pressures. In our environmental talk, it was clearly highlighted that one of the mangrove species, the Abyssinia marina in Meader Creek, responds to trampling. It dies off when it's trampled. So tourism pressures, where people visit mangroves and trample on this species, causes it to die off. When we come into the seagrass beds, we have a vulnerable species, one of the more dominant species that is vulnerable to sea urchin herbivory. And so for biodiversity, it was very interesting that the outcome and recommendation was that let's look beyond the ecosystem, but look specifically at vulnerabilities. Small scale fisheries were key, considered very key, and the fact that we should plan with them in mind. Multiple sectors were considered, and inclusion of private sector. Today, we are privileged to have Mohammed Hersi, and we are thankful that you could join us. And we still need added input and to hear the voices of private sector, because we believe that if we have a science-only process, we may be blind to many, many issues. We've had also maritime sector being ably presented, and we know that those are key aspects that need to be considered. Governance and legal frameworks for MSP were very key, and that came out. And I think Yvonne has given us very elaborate insights, and as well as Tim Andrews, on how best these can be integrated into this process. Next slide, please. This is the next series of issues that came up, and we stressed that we need to look at natural disasters and have some level of risk assessment as we undertake our planning process. There was also consideration of transboundary areas. We are working towards a transboundary management area between Kenya and Tanzania. And it was considered that MSP provides an opportunity for an innovative management regime to be created around shared goals for the two countries that will consider the diversity of the stakeholders and governance regimes. And so we are making much progress with different partners in that area. Sectoral conflicts, as has been highlighted by several speakers today, came up. The issue of data and its consolidation was also a recommendation that came out of the environmental workshop. And what was very key for me was that we do have a wealth of information. We just need to consolidate it and put it to work to guide us moving forward. Can I have the next slide? We then moved on to look at different decision support tools and different things that we can use to support the decisions we make. And the one thing that stood out was payment for ecosystem services, and we had a presentation from that highlighted Mukoko Pamoja, which is Mangrove Blue Carbon Project, and emphasis was put on consideration of viable and relevant alternatives for communities, as well as looking at payment for ecosystem services inland. There was also emphasis on capacity building. We were challenged in that session. I know we've talked about capacity building, but the challenge that came was the fact that it takes a long time. It's not a one-day event. We come into communities assuming that they will understand and that they will buy in, and we need to consider the length of time that it takes and integrate that into our work. Benefit sharing and co-participation with communities was key. Culture, traditional knowledge, and citizen science were pointed as being important. The participation of women and youth was also highlighted. The communication, and I think Zachary has put it up very, very well and brilliantly in his presentation, is how do we package and communicate the final products, and also how do we package and communicate the process for community feedback and for policy interventions. And one thing we recognized as we came towards the close of that session is that peer-reviewed science is critical for the process, and scientists need to publish so that material is available to be able to guide our processes. Next slide. I'll go very briefly into the next part of my presentation, where I just highlight the steps that we are taking towards the MSP process for Kenya. And I think Pascal in his presentation highlighted the steps and summarized them very ably. And these have been developed based on best practices and a scoping study that has been undertaken to provide us with a roadmap for the process. And the first is identifying the need and establishing an authority. The second, obtaining financial support. as you can see, this is a multi-skilled and multi-sectorial process that requires support to be able to make it happen. Organizing the process through pre-planning, organizing stakeholder participation, defining and analyzing existing conditions, defining and analyzing future conditions, preparing and approving the spatial management plan, implementing, enforcing, and sustaining that plan, monitoring and evaluating its performance, and adapting it to our unique situation are all part of our roadmap in this process. We can move to the next slide. We have several activities highlighted for this year. We have been challenged like every other sector and every other program in terms of COVID-19 and restrictions, but we are hopeful we will catch up. We are planning for several stakeholder sensitization processes, and we are very happy to have had these 4 sessions on environmental and MS and marine spatial planning, supported by IOC UNESCO. This is only the beginning of our engagement, and we look forward to several more engagements that are structured according to the expert guidance that we've received. We are planning for a review of policies and legal frameworks. If you listen to Zach carefully, he talked about working groups that were developed in the Lamu County spatial planning process. And we too have some ideas of working groups, and we are hoping to working towards firming that up, because we do need working groups that look at different elements of our plan. We are planning to undertake a strategic environmental assessment. So for those with environmental concerns, we are focusing on environment, knowing that Kenya has been a champion of environmental aspects globally, regionally, and also, and this has come down nationally. And lastly, we will undertake a capacity assessment, looking at what capacities our institutions that are aligned towards the plan have. And this process is being supported by IOC UNESCO as a first phase to understanding what we have and what we can contribute as institutions in terms of manpower, data sets, and institutional capacity towards this process. So the next slide. We need to have dialogues going forward about where do we start. Do we begin with the EEZ, focusing on EEZ-wide activities and near shore? And that is a dialogue that is ongoing. But it is very critical that we cover both scopes. And when we come to the near shore, we would have a very close interaction with county governments and local stakeholders. That is necessary because, as I showed in my first slides, the users of this plan are more in the near shore. In terms of funding, we are very privileged to have 2 funding sources that will be supporting this process. The World Bank funded Chelmsford project, which is being rolled out currently under the State Department of Fisheries, Aquaculture and the Blue Economy, has dedicated $4 million for the next 5 years of the process. We also have the Nature Conservancy that will provide technical assistance to the process worth $2 million over 5 years. Next slide. So as I said, I would be brief, and I would just like to thank you all for taking time to dialogue with us, and just highlight that it's important, as I thank you, that we consider the future generation and also make sure that this MSP process speaks for the voiceless, the organisms that we don't see. Kenya has been very ocean blind for a long time, and those that are close to the ocean tend to see these things, and we are hopeful that this process will also help us become more ocean aware, and that it will raise our consciousness as a nation to the protection and safeguarding of our ocean spaces. So thank you very much.